part of the WhatsApp group. So my name's Anne-Marie Ashton, and I helped create a group called Born Everywhere Made in Newham. And the kind of boiled down aims of the group are to inform local people about what's going on, about signposting people where they can go to get help with things like waste collection, giving us all a space to have a little moan every now and again. But we really do our best to try and say, right, we know there are problems, but let's be solution focused. Let's try and be positive, and let's have fun trying to make things better. So we've done our best to try and organise events. We had an amazing trip to Kew Gardens yesterday, which was part of Kew Gardens Community Access Week. And about 120, we think, in the end, came over from Newham, despite the traffic chaos and the transport chaos that was happening yesterday. So we essentially come together every weekend to discuss issues that are close to our hearts. And that can be, we've got our usual suspects of crime and fly tipping, which I know doesn't make the group sound very fun. But they're things that I think obviously affect our lives so much and can have a real negative impact on our quality of lives. And I think when people feel that they're on their own dealing with those things, it can bring you down. We moved back to East Ham. That's where I grew up, in East Ham. And then we'd moved out first to Barking and Dagenham, then to Hackney. And we moved back in 2021. And I, if I'm honest, was a little bit, I guess you could call it buyer's remorse, wondering, my God, have we done the right thing? The streets were so dirty, and the very, very blatant crime that went on, it got me down. And I did think, gosh, is this somewhere that I can see my future? And I thought about, it's something I'd been quite heavily involved in Hackney, was just very local community action. We'd got a car park converted into a growing space, and that gave our road a whole new lease of life. And it really improved my quality of life, because I loved getting out and talking to people and feeling that I was doing something productive, rather than just feeling upset or worried about the local crime that was going on in that space. And I thought, well, maybe I could apply what we did on our road back in Hackney and make that a little bit bigger, and scale up the community action and bringing people together, because I just saw such a transformation that had occurred on my road. And I thought, well, there's no reason that couldn't happen, but on a bigger scale. So a group of us who'd met, most of us met in the Central Park Cafe, and I'm quite a chatty person. I'm usually out with my kids, and we'd just all, been saying similar things. And I said, well, look, let's not be a group of people who just talk about the problems. Let's grab let's get some litter pickers and go out and just start litter picking and see where that goes. So we went down to, there's a pathway that went from my daughter's school at New City Primary School in Plaistow, and it went to the leisure centre, and it was just shocking. It was just, there was a burnt out motorbike. There was, what looked like medical waste from the hospital, I guess, where people had stolen, or I'm not sure, but there were just rubber gloves everywhere, syringes, just packets, bottles, all kinds, frankly, loads of bags of dumped clothes, loads of building fly tipping. And but it was so rewarding. And so a group of us went down there, and we were really quickly just joined. People passing by wanted to get involved. And we were just really lucky. I spoke to the right people in my local park and just said, oh, look, we want to do this. Who should I call? And they quickly just put us on to someone who would come and pick up the rubbish, give us some litter pickers. And so I'm really grateful for the initial support we had from that team. We had this amazing guy, Brian, just turn up with his truck, load it all up. And honestly, we did about 4 or 5 visits there. And it was just so satisfying seeing this really misused space become somewhere that wasn't so dreadful. We've not been back there for a little while because my daughter's no longer at that primary school, but I'm really hoping that it hasn't returned to how grim it was back in 2021. So we then kind of branched out and started doing litter picks in other places. We started running community events, and it has just grown relatively organically. We set up a WhatsApp group. So generally speaking, again, often while I was in the park with the kids, I'd just be talking to people about the local area, their experience. And as I'm not on any social media actually, so I don't have a Facebook account or anything like that. And in some ways, it was just a nice way to stay in touch with people. And I said, well, look, we've got a community group. We run some events, and it's a way of staying in touch. So I'd exchange numbers, add them to the group, and it grew really quickly to the 700 odd people that we have today. It's not for everyone. It's quite busy, and like with all these spaces, it can at times feel a bit negative because people need that space to occasionally just, I think, let out their frustration. I see that as part of the role because I think, if we're not allowed to vent our frustration, that's not good. And so that's where we are. So we closed the group midweek just because it was so busy. I'm a teacher in my spare time. So Tuesday to Friday, I teach geography, and trying to manage the group is quite busy. So we close it, and that allows us to reflect, I guess, read back on messages, catch up, and not feel too overwhelmed. And within that time, we just share what's going on in the local area. So people send it. There's a team of 10 admins. We're a really mixed bunch. We're a very busy bunch. So we seldom actually meet up in person, but we'll occasionally have a behind the scenes discussion about, if we feel that something needs to come up. That, I've got to say, a massive challenge for us. We've had two massive challenges. One is how we deal with politics, and the idea that people get very frustrated at local politicians. And we've said, well, look, this can't be a space to vent your frustration at individuals. So that's something we've had to draw a line with. And we've also said we really don't want party canvassing on the group, which is something that's very hard because we really want people to engage with politics. We want people to vote. And yet we didn't want our platform to become a space for for canvassing or, for kind of personal, advertisement in a way, just because we felt that wouldn't be right. But that's something we have continuous discussions. And then, of course, there's been the conflict in the Middle East, which has just devastated, our admins, our community. And it was really hard. We had to make a decision whether or not we felt that we could chair discussion on that topic. And at the moment, the general consensus from our admin team is still that it's too hard for us. And if we want to have a local discussion group, that's too big. So we've supported other groups to advertise their WhatsApps and their meetups when they're in Newham on our group. But we've said, actually, we don't feel that we're able to chair a discussion on that topic, which is so big. And in some ways, it's meant that Newham is so international. So many of us live here temporarily. And it's sometimes easy to literally just use Newham as a place to exist on your way to somewhere else. And part of our aim is to make Newham home and to give us pride in our area, and for people to say, you know what, I may not have been born here and I may not necessarily see my distant future here, but this is home and I want to feel pride in it. I want to settle, I want to form roots. I want to form deep connections. and I want to help join in the community efforts to make this area a better place. Because I've felt, my own family migrated here from the north in the 70s and 80s and very much used Newham in the way I've described. It was a place that they could afford somewhere to live. They moved, it was that typical migrant experience of my mum moving here. And then all of her brothers, she's the oldest of 9, and, brothers and sisters come in to live with her, but not feeling any real deep connection to the place, which is interesting now because she's the only one who stayed here. And I have really interesting discussions now with them about how actually, having moved away, they realise how deep their connections to the area actually were. And it got me thinking quite early on about people's time in Newham as such a valuable time when they start a family, they start a career, they they do really, really important things, which in a way is why they're so busy not getting involved with wider community stuff. But it means that time is incredibly important to them. And we need to maybe tap into that and make people realise that if they want to really make the most out of their time in Newham, they have to get involved. It's got to be a two-way thing. And it can't just be like lots of my relatives will say, oh, wasn't it great the way there used to be the Under the Stars Festival? And we don't have anything like that where we've moved to. Wasn't it great the way there were so many free events in Newham? And, again, that's something that isn't on offer in many other places. And it is a real, it is that give and take. And I think there's probably a bit too much take from some people in Newham and not enough give back to the community. And that's not to judge. I think it's because people, like I said, are in that really busy time of life where they actually just don't necessarily have the space. And because they're newcomers to the area, there's a sense that, oh, well, that's not my place. I'm not from here, or I'm not well connected here. And it's overcoming that sense. And it's saying, well, actually, we can all just throw ourselves into it and get involved. And I have met some really amazing people who've done just that and said, well, I want to run this event. I want to get involved. And something that our group have taken advantage of is the community's People Power Places scheme. And we've bid for funding to run something called East Ham Goes Wild. And that was part, the Q trip was part of that. We've got a camping trip coming up. And lots of other people have done similar things. They've bid for funding to see if they can make a difference within the wider community. And it's a controversial scheme for some. Some people are like, well, the council should be doing these things. And is it a good use of money? There's a lot of flaws with everything. Nothing's perfect. But I will say my experience of it so far, luckily enough, has been fantastic. And we've had a window box scheme where a local charity, New Life, which aims to help, I guess you could say, help get formerly homeless people and addicts back on their feet by landscaping projects and simple construction projects. They've built 100 odd window boxes for us with reclaimed wood, and we've distributed them within the community for people to grow wildflowers. And it's just been such a nice project to be part of. People have really bought into it, and we're all, excitedly waiting for these flowers to come up and hoping that they do their job of providing a bit of habitat for local bees and other creepy crawlies that actually we do need in our local area, even though we don't always probably welcome our bees and flies as much as potentially we need to. I'm just going to have a glass of water. So something that we've been discussing today is local history. So before I was a geography teacher, or while I was training really, while I was doing my degree and my PGCE, which is the teaching certificate, I worked at a local museum in North Woolwich called the North Woolwich Old Station Museum. And I absolutely loved it. It was just, for me, the best job. You know, I'd worked in Smiths on the high street. I'd worked in bars, which I hated. And that job I just loved. And I saw a post recently of someone who's doing some research about Newham's, in particular, the nature reserve, which back when I worked for the museum services was part of the Newham museums. And someone posted earlier, just, you know, out of the blue, about the North Woolwich Old Station building, which has been sold off. And I'm a bit suspicious, frankly, of how cheaply it was sold off for back in about 2005. Sorry, I'm running out of moisture. I talk a lot and sometimes I forget to drink. But there's another old building, the old dispensary in Stratford. And Katie Blake contacted this morning to say, you know, she's really wanting to do some digging about what's happening with that building. And we're hoping that this platform can maybe help us raise some issues that we feel could be being buried, forgotten, either accidentally or deliberately, and shine a light on them. I think I've spoken before about Newham City Farm being a real catalyst for me in wanting this group to become as big as possible, because I just moved back to the area, and one of the things that I loved hugely was Newham City Farm. And having a young family, I was just really excited to be part of it. I'd been a volunteer before, and I'd volunteered in Hackney City Farm when my oldest daughter was little. And I was devastated to find out that it closed during COVID, and how I guess you could say undemocratically, how secretly the whole thing had happened. And it made me worry, frankly, about transparency, democracy, accountability, and responsibility to our local residents. And it really made me feel like, as residents, we need to give ourselves a voice. And we need to make sure that we're being heard, we're being listened to, that emails are not just being ignored if they're ever read. And the best way to do that is by having numbers. And that's what's led us to today. So shortly, my understanding is that we're going to go to an advert break for 2 minutes. And then Matt Ponting, local illustrator, history investigator, is going to have a chat with us about the nature reserve. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Ya Rasulullah, 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 Ya
Thinking about selling or letting your home? With Maxwell Estates, you don't need to look any further. Well established with over 15 years of experience, Maxwell Estates are specialists in residential sales and lettings. We manage over 200 properties in and around Northwest London, keeping our landlords and tenants updated with all the latest laws and legislations. Based in Edgware, our experienced specialist negotiators always ensure we maximize the full potential of your property. Call us now on 0208 952 0808 for a free no obligation quotation, or visit our website www.maxwellestates.co.uk for further information. Maxwell Estates, the name you can trust.
With UK Export Finance, I'm fulfilling more export orders from around the world with working capital support.
Revive FM
94.0. On the radio
on your mobile.
and online.
Hello. Right, I'm just checking that I can be heard. And hi, Matt. Thanks so much
Hello.
for joining us. Can you hear me?
Hey, no, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Right, I've got a double thumbs up from Umar, so that must mean it's all going well. So thanks so much, Matt. This is, for everyone who knows, me and Matt have been trying to have a telephone conversation, and we finally attempted this morning, and my children just completely destroyed it. They had arguments. Cousins were sleeping over. So this is really lovely to have a moment without lots of small people shouting at me to talk to Matt. So Matt, can I hand over to you so that you can introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the project that you're involved in at the moment and anything else that you think would be interesting for people of Newham to hear?
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, my name is Matt Ponting. I am an illustrator, an artist educator. I live in Beckton, and I am doing a Newham Heritage Month project about East Ham Nature Reserve. It's really fascinating because I've lived probably in Newham for about 8 or 9 years now. For the first few years, I hadn't heard about this sort of quite a magical place. And I did a project there a few years ago. I created a mural for the Reserve Centre. And I also sort of added in some new wayfinding posts because there's a nature trail around the reserve itself. And only then did I kind of discover what a fascinating place it is. For those who don't know, it's a nature reserve on top of, as well as a graveyard. So it's got there's a Norman church in East Ham, really fascinating from the point of view of historically. It dates back to the 10th or 11th century. So it's really beautiful old church. And as was back then, there was marshland all around, and it was a really lovely village church, a Norman church. Over the time, the churchyard got larger and larger, and in the mid 1970s, fast forward all of that time, and the churchyard essentially was full, and because of Dutch elm disease, the London Borough of Newham, the council came in, and at that point, back in 1976, there was somebody came up with the idea of turning it into a nature reserve, which is really fascinating. And at that point, yeah, things kind of kicked on. I've learned a lot since, that's for sure. So when I arrived, probably 2021, the reserve itself it's large. There are trails all around, and there's a little reserve centre, a visitor centre. And when I was doing some work there, I kind of discovered an awful lot of interesting, various kind of paraphernalia and things within the reserve centre that got me thinking. So that's the hopefully a short-ish version. But what's really exciting though is this is the 40th year since the reserve centre was opened by Queen Elizabeth II in 1983.
Okay. Yeah, and Matt, it's occurred to me. Do you know about the Wren Group? So
I do.
You do, because they had an event there. I think it was last summer, their 50th anniversary. So this is the Walthamstow, Redbridge, Enfield, and Newham Conservation Group. And I was just thinking, is that an interesting lead for you in terms of speaking to people?
It is, and I've spoken to a couple of people at Wren. A chap called Peter Williams, who's heavily involved, but and also intriguingly, and this is where it gets quite interesting. Back in the mid 70s to late 70s, a few of the lads, including a a teenager called Paul Webb, who I've spoken with, were sort of cleared out the churchyard to sort of turn it into a nature reserve and kind of uncover the trails. And at that point, there's quite an interesting story where there used to be this program called Animal Magic on the BBC, which was really big in the kind of like sort of late 70s, early 80s. And they came to visit and did a story on the what the Wren Society was doing at that time. So Wren were really historically very invested right from the very start. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because I heard a lovely story that it was set up by a local postman to stop kids stealing the eggs, and I guess I don't know, just damaging nests, or I think egg collecting was a big thing at some point, and he recognised that there were groups of like local kids doing that.
Exactly. It's just a lovely story because at that time, it's sort of voluntary, but there's this sort of idea that especially some sort of teenage boys, I think, were very, very much involved at that time.
Yeah.
And really were protecting the nests of these birds. So, for example, I think there was a swan's nest that Paul told me about, I believe, in Wanstead, that they basically stayed 24 hours right around the clock. And they took it in turns because for about 4 or 5 years, the swan just wasn't having any babies because at that time, as you say, the trend was very much to take eggs away. But and from that, there's grown into a very interesting group, and that conservation group meets at Eastham Nature Reserve occasionally, has this kind of link, but still does some really, really wonderful work in the borough, in Bourtham Forest and in Newham to let people know about how they can conserve the birds around here.
Yeah, because I bumped into them. I work in Snaresbrook, and I was cycling home through Wanstead Park and saw a group of people pulling stuff, like doing conservation work. And actually, the person I met was Hayden Powell, who was the former head teacher at Brampton. So he could be an interesting person. He's on our community group, and so he was head teacher, I think, at Brampton all through the 80s and 90s, because my husband was there when he was the head teacher. And he might be a really interesting guy to talk to because he probably shared his love of nature with a whole generation of our kids, and that was, I've got to say, that was a tough time to be a head teacher at Brampton. It was quite a different cohort back in the 70s and 80s, according to my husband at least. So yeah, he might be another interesting person for you to talk to.
Thank you. And there's a little link there. I've spoken with a student at Brampton at that time in 1988. I've got this lovely recording and also photos from her going to the nature reserve. And I think that for me, there's a real magical moment there where there's this lovely kind of story that she tells around what they did. And this is, I think this actually in the primary school at that time. I need to double check, but it would make sense with the ages. And this, how she puts it is that it's this unexpected reserve in the center itself. If you've ever been in, and I know you have, Anne-Marie, but if you go up to the top floor, like the building itself is quite small, but I've done quite a bit of research in terms of how the building was set up with the architecturally, and the idea was that on the first floor you get this gorgeous, almost like 270-degree view all the way around. And you're at the sort of level of the top of the church, so you can see all across, and that's where the teaching room is. So there's this sort of understanding of like, it's quite astounding being there, and then also for the children to kind of get in and explore the reserve itself. Yeah, it's a unique place, that's for sure.
And Matt, who paid for that building in the first place? Do you know?
Yeah, it's super interesting. It came from essentially GLC, match funded by someone that I can't quite figure out, but yeah, it was it was from them.
And you mentioned Passmore Edwards when we were chatting earlier. So you said that lots of the stuffed animals came from collectors. So how old are those stuffed animals that are there?
Well, over 100, probably 150 years old, some
Yeah.
of them. Although there are a few stories to be told about them as well. To keep it short, sadly, most of them, in fact, all of them pretty much aren't there anymore. There was a little fire that happened in 2014, around that time.
No.
The fire wasn't too terrible in terms of it didn't affect the building too badly, because it was sort of happened on from the outside, but with the smoke and what have you, these items got damaged, and they're quite old, and so what's left, and a little plug, if anybody would like to come to a celebration event next Saturday between 12 and 4, so Saturday 8th, you'll be able to see what's left there. There are some little exhibits of, for example, the Moths and the Beatles and what have you. They do remain, as well as I've uncovered a really strange, slightly ghoulish kind of box I opened up, and you've seen all of these different eyes, the beads that were used as eyes for taxidermy and what have you. So they're there. So there are little glimpses, and coming back to your original question or thoughts about Passmore Edwards, I mean, you're absolutely right. It goes back a long, long time to a gentleman's club in the 19th century called the Essex Field Club. Passmore Edwards, end of the 19th century, created the Passmore Edwards Museum, and he was a benefactor as such. And the collection from the Essex Field Club came into that museum. So for almost 60, 70 years, it was a really, really good situation where the museum took hold of the collection. Essex Field Club had somewhere for it to go, and then as time went on, what we ended up with towards the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century was a few stuffed animals in the Eastham Nature Reserve, which at one point was part of Passmore Edwards. So there's a long story there and a long history. And as you say, there are some bits of the collection, just a few little fragments left, which kind of hint at something that's from a long, long sort of bygone era.
Yeah, I mean, that really raises a sad issue at the minute, that we actually don't have any museums currently in Newham. And so we've gone from this really rich heritage of, the large Passmore Edwards in Stratford. There was the North Woolwich Old Station Museum, the dispensary, which someone was discussing today on the group. That I remember when I worked for the services being sent there. I think there was some sort of event going on anyway, and I'm never quite sure whether it was just open for people to look around. So presumably that was a pharmacy originally, hence why it was called a dispensary. I can't fully remember kind of what was on display, but a lot of people really do decry the fact that we've ended up with this situation. I believe most of our, we've got a huge amount of artifacts and displays that are all stored somewhere, I believe in Hertfordshire, and there's now one person that manages this huge collection, because I got in touch with her a while ago. I think it was to borrow some costumes. We did an event one summer, and it was this really complicated process of her bringing some stuff from Hertfordshire and dropping it at Stratford, and me collecting it. And I just thought, gosh, I loved my time at North Woolwich Old Station. They had a full working steam engine that they used to run once a month, going up and down the track. The displays were really lovely. They can't have been done much before I started working there in 2000, I think it was. And, it is very sad. I was speaking to my cousin yesterday and said the closest we have to a museum around here is the Miller's Well pub, which has lots of displays. But even that, now it's been sold off. I've not been back to see if those displays still exist. And yeah, I think we need to get Katie Blake along to the Nature Reserve to talk to you, because she seems, as close as we've got really to a local campaigner for history. And Katie, please do feel free I should try giving her a call, see if because she's probably got loads of info that she could share with you, because she does so much independent digging and contacting. And I know when we were discussing what's going to happen to all of the displays from the Miller's Well, she was very much saying, actually she's contacted Weatherspoons and trying to find out, can they be given to the borough? And Weatherspoons had said no. And yeah, it's a worry, and it's lovely now that we do have things like the Heritage Month that will shine a light on some of our treasures, because Newham is very much a place of the moment, isn't it? And there's, I heard a really interesting statistic that every 10 years, 50% of our population renews, replaces, people move out, people move in. And it's very easy to not know what was there before. So even now, the Newham City Farm that I was talking about before you came on air is already history. And so many people I speak to have no idea that it was there. So we're going to break for 2 minutes, Matt. But, if you're welcome to stay online and rejoin us, it's all a little bit kind of playing things by ear. So we're going to break now. And then, if you come back in 2 minutes' time to continue the conversation.
Sure, thank you.
All right.
पानी के बगैर जिंदगी का तस्वुर नामुमकिन है। दुनिया भर में तकरीबन 2 अरब से ज्यादा लोग ऐसे हैं जिनको पीने का साफ और महफूज पानी मुयस्सर नहीं। रोजमर्रा के इस्तेमाल के साथ साथ पीने के लिए इन्हें आलूदा पानी पर इन्हिसार करना पड़ता है।
producer.
Now it should be okay.
Oh, so was there no
The
sound?
mic, yeah, the mic.
Okay. Yeah, I was just explaining that I don't know what I'm doing, and then that was proof that I don't know what I'm doing. So thank you to Umar. Yeah, so we were just talking about Newham's history, really, Matt. And I know you've been sort of involved with the farm as well, haven't you, in Beckton? I really am keen that issue never goes away, and that we really do keep pushing to make sure that yeah, we still, or one day we have a farm back. I don't know what your experience has been of that, because you're in Beckton, and that's such an issue, isn't it, for Beckton residents? And you've got the amazing Jenny and Alison, who have ensured that it doesn't just go away, basically, and we don't all just forget that there was ever a farm. Is that something that you'd be willing to talk about? I know it's quite a political hot potato, Newham City Farm.
I think what I'd say is that, I mean, I did visit one time when I first came down here. I think what I'd love to pick up on is this sort of idea that history vanishes so quickly. So that, like, so many things around, especially around the Royal Docks and around this area, are so temporary and don't get recorded. And I think that, talking about, and it's something that I feel, really, really strongly. We have a kind of transitory population here. And so, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years disappears, and these projects and these, these sort of, how should I put it, exhibitions, places, spaces, they just sort of can disappear. And I found there are various projects that almost, the websites have gone down, various things, and what do we have if we don't have a museum, as you say? I mean, what I'm excited about is that we're going to get the Newham Heritage Centre back in Canning Town. However, that is going to be, a couple of years, probably a year or two at the very least, before we get that. So how in that time, over the next year and a half, how can we ensure that there's preservation as much as anything else? I think that's where sort of my focus is at the minute, and I think this is where the Newham Heritage Month comes in so sort of so brilliantly, that it allows normal people like myself, like individuals and groups to preserve. It's something that I've learned hugely about over the last month or few months that I've been working on this, is the difference between having a conversation, having a chat, having a web page, and having an archive and recording that in a particular type of way. And I found the whole process really thought-provoking, and it definitely echoes back to your kind of thoughts about history disappearing and these places and spaces disappearing. It's really important. Yeah.
There's something I'd love to do is bring people back more, and actually it was part of when we were beginning Born Everywhere Made in Newham, the name partly came from an idea of having an exhibition of people who had, because I've come up with a figure. I'm a bit of an amateur demographer, and I estimate that there's somewhere in the region of 3 million people alive who've lived in Newham at one point or another, and that's just a bit of an educated guess based on having grown up here. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to go and speak to those people now about where they are, what Newham meant to them, and get them reflecting on their time. And actually, I think I was saying earlier, people's time in Newham is often one of the most difficult times of their life. They might be new to London, they might be new to the UK. They will often start their family here, they'll start their career here. It's that real time of your life, which I'm partly still in, when you're just, really, you're just so busy, you're so overwhelmed. And obviously I'm very lucky in the way that I don't have some of the real difficult, issues with housing and finances that many people in Newham have. And I think often people look back very negatively, and it'd be lovely to maybe get them to truly think about it and to say, well, actually, what did you get that was good? And my aunt yesterday, I was speaking to her, and she started her family here. She started her career here. So she'd studied in London, and then she'd moved in. My relatives lived next door to my parents. So my parents lived in one house in East Ham, and next door, my mum's brother, sister, and cousin had bought that house. So we had our little Liverpudlian enclave. And she was saying that actually lots of her dreams, even though she's not lived here for about 17 years now, lots of her dreams are in East Ham. And she frequently dreams that she goes back to the house and that the owners are out, and she goes into it. And my other aunt then said, gosh, I have something similar. And she said, lots of my dreams are from that period of my life. And I just thought it's fascinating. I wonder how many of those 3 or so million people out there still are so deeply and almost subconsciously connected to Newham, because it played such an absolute pivotal role in leading to where they are now. We know that lots of our population move onwards and arguably upwards. They'll often, move on to a bigger home. They'll, end up with somewhere with a driveway or with, a bigger garden. And yet there's that very, very deep connection to the place that they lived in Newham, because ultimately that formed who they are. And half of Essex, it would seem, and, lots of Redbridge and Upminster, Barking and Dagenham, Havering, lots and lots of people have lived in Newham. And I feel like there's almost a narrative, maybe is the word. I know everyone uses that word all the time. I hope I'm using it in the right context. But to say, oh, Newham, it was such a dump. I'm so glad to have got out of there. And I work now on the border of Redbridge, and a lot of the students, their families come from Newham, and when they hear I'm from Newham, they're like, oh, miss, yeah, Newham's, that they just get this very negative, even if they've never been there. Their parents or their grandparents be like, oh gosh, you're so lucky, you live in Ilford, or you live in Gants Hill, or that you don't live in Newham, and life is really hard there. And essentially they're sold the tale of Newham as the ghetto, the kind of the slums where people live when they have to live there. And I would just love to see that change more to Newham being a place that just people are very proud of. I attended a meeting at the town hall, and there were about 100 of us residents there. And one guy said, look, I'm embarrassed for my family from Singapore to come here. And he doesn't want, and I just thought, oh, that's so sad. And I could understand it, because my grandmother came, recently, and she said, oh my goodness, I've never seen it looking as dirty as it does. And, she got off at East Ham tube station, and we're just desperate to feel more pride in our home. And I am impatient for improvement to happen. Hence why I give up a lot of my free time to do this. But I always justify it because I don't really watch TV and I don't go shopping. And I'm like, well, this is my pastime. Other people will devote 20, 30 hours to telly and shopping. And I don't do that. I do community action as my my hobby. But I'd love it, through these heritage projects, if you could bring back people to the area and get them thinking about, okay, well, what did the nature reserve mean to me? And maybe they've gone on to be conservationists elsewhere, like Hayden Powell. He's now living in Waltham Forest, presumably, and still very involved in conservation. But his he's very rooted to Wren, And I wonder those boys who, the postman stopped from stealing the nests, did they go on to become advocates for nature elsewhere? And yeah, how can we bring that back? So I'm hopefully going to come to one of your events on Wednesday, aren't I, at 2 p.m. And
That's
remind me,
true.
yeah,
No worries. I also at Eastland Nature Reserve I run or facilitate rather family nature club.
okay,
And the idea behind that is that during half terms, and also we're going to do this over the summer, is that people can gather. It's free. Turn up at the nature reserve, and we have tables outside, and then we go on a walk. And so we go on a walk, collect what we can find in the reserve, but also there's a lot there, a lot to learn from that, and then what we bring back, use in the artwork. So
okay.
over the past year, we've done collage, we've done printing, we've done drawings, we've done all sorts, and lots of making as well, which has been really fun. So making little crafts and that kind of thing. And what I find is really quite humbling in a way is that I've looked back in the research that I've done and looked back, 20, 30 years, and similar activities were happening then as well. So just a sort of, it's an opportunity to get out, to look around you, and I think that often, it's a cliche, but it's true, we don't have a lot of time sometimes, especially we're on the screen a lot of the time, and I think all of us probably are now, to get out and have a little wander and look around, put screens away and look around and spot and identify, and then do something quite communally. I mean, that's what I love about it as much as anything, is the conversations that happen at the end of end of it, and end up having a maybe a cup of tea at the end, and having a natter as well. So it's and also the other thing I absolutely love is it's often the first time of people who've been to the reserve. I was one of them, as I say, maybe 5 years ago, didn't even know it existed really. So really exciting place, and there's something as well was just the church there. So there's a piece of history that we have hidden in plain sight that goes back blimey, over 1,000 years, so very, very cool.
Yeah, and these green spaces, we don't have many of them. So Matt, thank you so much for joining us. And
you're very welcome.
I'm looking forward to seeing you on Wednesday, maybe Saturday as well. I like to hang out locally with the kids, so it sounds like my cup of tea. All right, well, Matt, thanks, and we will continue our conversation. All right, best wishes.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thinking of selling or letting your property? Need someone reliable to find the best prospect for your home? Well, look no further. Cameron Adams is here to take care of all your needs. Our professional and experienced team will guide you through the entire process and ensure you find the right client for your property. For a no-obligation quotation, contact us now on 0208 558 2000. That's 0208 558 2000. Or visit us at 30 Church Lane in Leytonstone. Cameron Adams, always at your service.
Nikah, talaq, counseling on matrimonial disputes, Islamic wills, Islamic law of inheritance, or an Islamic verdict on any other issue. The Muslim Sharia Council is at your service. We provide official certification, and our experienced and highly qualified imams are available to provide you with guidance when needed. MQI London is based